All right, let's talk Dallas Cowboys. I'm Nick, and this is our daily Cowboys show. It is Saturday, which of course means there's an awesome slate of college football games, but that doesn't mean there's not a lot of massive and really exciting Cowboys news to get to, which we of course will in due time. But first, as we always like to on this channel, get things started with a little stat of the day, a little palate cleanser, if you will. Let's go ahead and pull this up right here. Talking about quarterbacks' ability to mitigate negative plays. This is courtesy of at Pat Analytics is the individual who put this chart together, and it's very interesting. So it's ranking the 32 quarterbacks in terms of their ability to negate negative plays or mitigate them. Negative play rate, MPR, is basically how he breaks this down. He's got interception percentage, sack percentage, and fumble percentage, and the sack percentage is sacks that are attributed to the quarterback's fault. So if the quarterback gets sacked because of an offensive line bust, it's not on the quarterback, at least based on his metric. And there you can see Dak Prescott has the lowest, which of course is the best, negative play rate in the National Football League among quarterbacks. What's interesting is that there's not a lot of correlation here, it seems, between how good you are at mitigating negative plays and how good your team offense is or how good you are, right? Prescott and Goff are both 1-2, but Fields is 3, Mayfield is 4, which is great, but Flacco, Nix, and Mac Jones are 5, 6, 7 before Mahomes and Jay Daniels get into the mix. So it's kind of all over the place here, but it speaks to a larger theme, and this goes back to, I think, what the new coaching staff has instilled, because we talked about earlier this week that the Cowboys are also the best in football in terms of avoiding negative plays when it comes to running the football, right? Mitigating the negative rushing plays. They're the best in football when it comes to that. And they're also the best in football, ostensibly, and mitigating negative plays in the passing game as well. And I think it speaks to an overall strategy. It's clearly a theme. If you're the best in football at mitigating negative rushing plays and the best in football at mitigating negative passing plays, I don't think that's a talent thing necessarily. I think that's a scheme thing. I think that's a strategic thing. And that's a big part of what Schottenheimer and Adams have been trying to do this entire time, is to make sure the Cowboys stay ahead of the sticks, right? Keep the flow, sequence plays. And I think that's one of the important elements here. If you're trying to have one play, build on the next, to build on the next, to build on the next, in terms of a strategy, in terms of a game plan, it all falls apart if you get to 2nd and 12. That's one of the things that happened under Mike McCarthy a lot, right? There was never any rhythm, right? There'd be a negative play or a dead play or a couple dead plays, and just there was no flow, and then it just became a straight drop back game in a lot of instances, right? Here with Schottenheimer, here with Clayton Adams, and Dorsey as the quarterback's coach, you look at Riley, of course, leading the offensive line, there's rhythm, right? There's a flow to it. And I think avoiding the negative plays has been a big part of that flow. And I think it's a really underrated part of what the Cowboys have done offensively so far this season. All right, let's get into the news. We got some exciting stuff for you guys today. One of the reasons why I'm wearing this colored shirt has exactly to do with this report that was courtesy of Jordan Schultz. Sources: Cowboys standout linebacker DeMarvion Overshown, Agent Zero himself, is nearing a return to practice, and the team expects to open his window later this month with the goal of having him playing by November. Overshown tore his ACL, PCL, and MCL last year amid a breakout season in which he recorded 84 tackles, 5 sacks, 1 interception, 1 forced fumble, 1 fumble recovery, 8 tackles for loss, and 1 defensive touchdown. He's worked relentlessly to get back, and his return is close. Massive news for Dallas. So I saw one X account. I'm trying to remember the guy who posted it, and I apologize. I spent a lot of time this morning trying to dig it up, who said and had a comment that I thought was absolutely right on the money. This is like a trade deadline trade for Dallas, right? This is like trading for a defensive weapon at the trade deadline. And he's 100% correct. That's the right take. Now, it doesn't mean the Cowboys won't make a trade, or it doesn't mean the Cowboys, won't make more moves from the trade deadline. But when people say Dallas needs to add a defensive playmaker at the deadline, this is it, guys. This is DeMarvion Overshown, right? Because here's the thing. Overshown, when he comes back into the fold, right, he starts practicing, in the next, week or so? And then maybe a couple weeks, and then returns early November, post-bye, takes a few weeks to get up to speed, and maybe by Thanksgiving, he's full speed ahead, right? That's basically what you would get if you were traded for a player, right? The Cowboys signed Jadeveon Clowney after week 2 against the New York Giants. I would argue it's basically this week, maybe last week, 3 or 4 weeks later, that he's finally fully integrated into the defense, right? It takes time for any new addition to get integrated, just like it'll take 3-4 weeks at least for Overshown to get integrated post-injury, even though he'll have returned to practice for a month, even though he's been in Dallas this entire time, of course. So this is like a trade deadline move, right? This is like trading for a defensive playmaker. And I think that's an important context to understand when people are like, Dallas needs to make a move, right? Wow, NFC is wide open, right? Dallas needs to make a trade. Guys, you are making a trade. Trade's coming in. His name's DeMarvion Overshown. He's coming to the fold, right? And just like we're not exactly sure how Overshown's going to look this season coming off an injury, you're never exactly sure what a trade's going to get you. And I think the Cowboys understand that. Now, it doesn't mean they won't trade for someone, but when they look around this defense and like, okay, where do we need to add bodies? Well, clearly not defensive tackle, right? Defensive end, listen, you've got Ezraku there, right? You really like what Houston is doing. You already signed Clowney, right? Obviously, Nealand and Williams and some of the other guys, Fowler, right? You want to see a little bit more out of those guys at times, but you have bodies there. How about corner? Okay, you have Diggs. You obviously have Bland. Reddy Stewart's been doing good as a young guy. Elam's now a backup, which is where he's preferred, right? You're getting Kalen Carson into the mix. Butler's not far behind. And then suddenly Rebel's going to join the mix. Okay, so that's where you sit there. Maybe safety position, but you want to see what Wanye Thomas does, right? And Hooker and Wilson aren't out for the season, so maybe safety, but what safeties are exactly available, right? I mean, any team with a quality safety, because it's one of those weird positions where it's sort of barbelled. Most of the NFL is sort of on one corner in terms of having quality safeties, to the point where teams with good safeties pay them a lot of money, like the Ravens, for example. There's not exactly a lot of safeties that are available. And then you go to linebacker and say, well, they definitely need linebacker help. And I agree, and Overshown's coming back. So if you want the Cowboys to make a trade, who exactly is it for, right? Who are you going to get, right? People say Trey Hendrickson, right? And listen, if you could get him, fantastic, right? But the reality is the Bengals probably aren't going to trade him because they still believe they can contend for a championship. That's why they traded for Flacco, to try and stem the tide until Burrow returns. Listen, the reality is this is the major trade deadline move. It's Overshown getting healthier than expected. And listen, I'm such a huge fan of Overshown, and I'm excited to see him play. I loved watching him play. One of the few bright spots last year at times, as the injuries took their toll and the team was playing poorly, was seeing number 13 at the time just totally emerge as a superstar. If he can just get back on the field and start doing some of those things as he figures things out and gets his legs underneath him, I'm all for that, because I'm such a fan. I'm a little biased with that. Like, I loved watching him play football. His energy, his reckless abandon, his playmaking, absolutely fantastic. And listen, I want to see him play, just for my own selfish nature as a fan of his and what he does and how he plays the game. But just in terms of roster construction, guys, this is the trade deadline move. It's Overshown getting healthy. And I think people need to understand how massive the impact this is. And it's not like this is a surprise, right? Obviously, they have updates along the way. And one of the reasons for the story is because his most recent checkup with one of the doctors was so positive. But the Cowboys knew this was coming, or at least had an idea this was coming. They see him every day. They're in contact with the rehab, folks and the doctors, and Overshown himself, right? We've been doing stories every once in a while saying, listen, he's doing well. He's ahead of the game. He's ahead of the game. The Cowboys knew this was coming. Now, will it mean they don't make a trade? I don't know. We'll have to see. Well, you talk about the Cowboys. They need to make a splash move. They need to make a splash move. Here it is, guys. It's Agent Zero returning to the fold. And listen, that's the best splash move you could possibly make. A young, dynamic linebacker who's been in the building the entire time. That's a great role model, incredible, just professional. You talk about a pro's pro, like a guy who tackles rehab like this and gets things done ahead of time. That is professional to the extreme. You talk about leadership, literally everything you could possibly ever want in an acquisition. That's DeMarvion Overshown. And if he's the only acquisition they make as we get deeper into the season, I'm for that 100%. All right, let's get into the news. Some more news here. This is courtesy of Todd Archer, beat reporter over at ESPN. According to multiple sources, running back Miles Sanders needs a chondral tissue graft on his left knee, in which pieces of bone and cartilage were transplanted into the affected area to improve the joint. Cornerback Trayvon Diggs had similar surgery in January. So I am not a doctor, obviously, but that sounds incredibly awful. And Miles Sanders will be done for the season. At this point, it's been reported and confirmed by pretty much everybody, which means it's Jaden Blue time in Dallas. And it's such a bummer for Sanders. I mean, he's a guy that was, wasn't terrible for Dallas so far this season. Obviously, the fumble against Philadelphia kind of stunk, but he had ran hard. He had done some good things. It's disappointing that he's no longer going to play the rest of the year, and now we're here with Jaden Blue. But it does speak to the depth. It does speak to what the Cowboys are trying to do in building a deeper roster, where the backup to Javonte Williams, who's having such a great season, is a dynamic young rookie that everyone's been excited to see, take the field. And I think this is one of the reasons why you have depth. This is one of the reasons why you build a wider roster, where you're like, hey, listen, if a guy's out with injury, that stinks. Gosh, speedy recovery, wish him nothing but the best. But now we get to see an exciting rookie, right? Hey, listen, Sanborn's out with an injury, that stinks. Hey, now we see more Shamar James, right? It's those kind of things that speak more to the depth and the exciting nature of this Cowboys team than maybe what we've seen in years past. All right, this next report here is wide-ranging injury updates per Tommy Yerish. He posted some injury updates from Cowboys head coach Brian Schottenheimer. Tyler Guyton with concussion and Tyler Smith with a knee took positive steps yesterday and are trending in a positive way to get back. Guyton on the injury report was listed as a full participant by the end of the week, which basically means he's 100% good to go. He has cleared the protocol, so he will return, barring something incredibly just stunning at this point. So depth at the tackle position has returned with Thomas, Guyton, and Steele back in the fold. I mentioned this yesterday, but as well as Thomas played, replacing Guyton, I think it's one of those things. It's great to see depth emerge, but boy, on the offensive line, especially at tackle, right? You never want to get down to the third string tackle. So again, getting Guyton back into the fold and kind of allowing Thomas to be a depth piece going forward, or if Thomas becomes a starter, having Guyton or Steele, whatever, become the depth pieces, I think is key. Tyler Smith, all of last week prior to the Jets game, did not participate, a DNP in practice, and then he was just obviously, he was active for the game, but he didn't play, of course. He was sort of an emergency option, and he was a limited participant in practice all this week, so that's certainly a positive trend. And you look at what Schottenheimer was saying here about Tyler Smith trending in a positive direction. I don't know exactly sure if he's, what the deal is with Smith in terms of, the percentage chance of him playing or not, right? I honestly felt prior to the Jets game that it was, 60-40 that he was going to play, but then he didn't. So I really don't know what to feel here, but I feel like the fact that he actually practiced this week is a good sign. And, all the vibes seem a lot better this week than what they were last week when it comes to Tyler Smith. So I would say he's a much better chance to play. And that obviously would be huge for Dallas because it would basically, again, get an all-pro back in the offensive lineup, which is huge, but avoid having a second string guard in the game where now you're one injury away from having to play a third string guard, and sometimes those things can snowball and debacles can happen. So obviously big news there. Mingo, who was working his way off of the injured reserve, he's in his 21-day practice window. He had a knee injury that he was coming back from. He didn't suffer a setback. He's basically out for the game. He's had some soreness. The way the Cowboys manage some of these injured reserve guys, I think is important, right? It's, because you're so limited. If you're on injured reserve, you're really practicing off to the side. You're not really involved with the team in any real capacity, doing the rehab work and things like that. So if you go through practice and you go through a week of practice and you're like, okay, you're off injured reserve, you're clear, but yeah, you're still not maybe in game shape yet, right? You're a little sore, a little stiff. There's no reason to rush it back, right? So you've got 21 days to figure that out. So he likely won't play against the Carolina Panthers. I think he's been downgraded to out, which makes sense at this point. Joe Milton and Dante Fowler both missed practice, but Milton missed it for a personal reason. I believe it was the birth of a child. So good, congratulations to Joe for that. And Fowler was sick, so they're back at practice. So overall positive updates, I think, on the injury front when it comes to those guys specifically. I think Mingo eventually will return. It'll be interesting to see what they do at the wide receiver position long-term this season for Dallas. But we'll have to see with Tyler Smith if he actually suits up and plays this weekend in Carolina. Him playing would obviously be a huge boost for Dallas. All right, next report here is courtesy of John Machota talking about Javonte Williams. I thought this was an interesting post. Just got to read it to you guys now. He wrote, Cowboys running back Javonte Williams said he had doubts about his NFL future after his significant knee injury in Denver in 2022. There was a time I thought it was going to be over with, but I just kept going. The coaches got a lot of trust in me. I like my teammates. I feel like everybody plays together. We complement each other so well. Just the competition in the running back room, that's what really made me go so hard on how happy he is right now in Dallas. He says, I like it a lot. We got playmakers at every position. It's probably one of the first times I've had this many superstars on the same team. We just got to keep it going. On what he liked about Dallas, I rehabbed here during my serious surgery, so I was here probably for 2 to 3 months. I like it, and I like horses too. They got a lot of horses out here. That's pretty funny. I like that. He wraps up here saying, on any promises about what his role would be when he signed in March, this is my favorite part of the whole report. There were no promises at all. Brian Schottenheimer just told me straight up. He was like, it's wide open. You're going to have to come in and compete. Yeah, so this was back in March, right? So this is, again, speaks to Schottenheimer and the entire new coaching staff's mindset. Listen, open opportunities. Come in and compete, man. And that's what we saw from Javonte Williams, right? He came in, compete, did well, and now has done extremely well through 5 games so far this season. Obviously was a talented back with the Denver Broncos. I remember he eviscerated Dallas in 2021 in that just ugly game. My goodness. I think it was week 8, week 9 in 2021 where Dallas just got shockingly eviscerated at home against Denver. Williams had a monster performance. I look at what Schottenheimer has done with Williams, giving him the opportunities and the competition. I think is so big, right? It goes back to the culture, and you can see in Williams' comments how happy he is to be here. He likes the talent on the team and the way they play together. One of the things that happens when you when you create a truly competitive environment without any favoritism or anything like that. Not saying Mike McCarthy was bad in those areas, but Schottenheimer and his staff is certainly better, and definitely better than it was under Garrett. Is that the more talented guys, like players? Here's the thing to understand. And when I played college football, FCS small time level, I got to throw that caveat out there for anyone who thinks I may have been a big time guy. I wasn't. Players know who are the best players, right? You just know, right? On the team, okay, that guy's the best, that guy's not very good. And sometimes when a guy who everyone knows isn't very good is getting a lot of opportunities, get a lot of playing time, and it feels like there's some favoritism involved, it just degrades a culture. It just degrades a locker room, so to speak, almost more than anything else. Because okay, the coaches are playing favorites, right? And so competitiveness dies down, right? Motivation dies down. It happens, right? So I witnessed it myself, on certain positions, not my position group necessarily, but other position groups on different seasons that I played in college, where I was like, yeah, that guy shouldn't be starting. This other guy's a lot better, right? And everybody kind of knows that. When the Cowboys, with their competitive atmosphere, the fact that, they have this environment and they're letting the better players kind of emerge, players know this. That's why Williams, I think, is so excited to say, oh man, we all compliment each other. I'm happy to be here. It's a great place. It's because talented players who work hard and are doing good things, when you get rewarded across the board, you feel motivated, you feel engaged. And the not so talented players, or the players who aren't playing as well, they also feel motivated because they know if they step up their game, they'll get the opportunities too. So it's definitely a great vibe across the entire, I'll say, locker room culture when you have that kind of structure set up as your team. And I think under McCarthy and certainly under Garrett, they never really had that, at least not as well as they have that right now under Schottenheimer. And it's an important aspect, right? One of the downsides, I think, and I know it's sort of a grave sin, a mortal sin to criticize Jimmy Johnson, but one of the big criticisms, I think, historically of Jimmy Johnson was how much he favored his stars. Like, he was obviously hyper-disciplinary and a great coach. I'm not saying he wasn't, of course. But one of the things that would happen is because of the way he sort of differentiated his stars in certain ways, and he would, he would obviously coach them and correct them and yell at them and things like that. But it was in a context of, so that way the other players could see that he was being tough on the stars. But everyone knew he loved his stars. He treated his stars a certain different way, right? That's always how he was. He was that way in Miami too. But one of the things I think that's really interesting is that when you have that in an environment, it doesn't breed depth. It doesn't breed the second and third comers to be like, okay, I want to go ahead and emerge and be this, beat out Michael Irvin. But you're not going to, right? I want to be the next whatever. But you're not going to, because Jimmy's tough on you and he's not tough on them, right? It's a tough, it just, whether it's true or not, you get that feeling. And when some of those stars started bleeding away through free agency in the Cowboys in the 1990s, they didn't have the depth. Right? And I'm not saying Jimmy Johnson is to blame for the Cowboys' decline. It's just a small factor. But having a culture of constant competitiveness is critically important for the mid-tier guys, right? Williams was a mid-tier guy. He was a throwaway signing by most smart people in the media. It wasn't considered a big-name acquisition at all. But because of Schottenheimer's competitive environment and the culture he's instilled, he's been able to rise and emerge as a legitimate star so far this season for the Dallas Cowboys, right? And I think having that in today's day and age is really important. You can have the Jimmy Johnson mindset pre-free agency, right? We're like, listen, okay, we're going to draft and develop our stars. And listen, the second and third tier guys, I'm going to be super hard on them, even harder than I am on other people, because these guys, I got to bring them up a little bit so that way they can at least field a talented team, that we can be a good, deep team. But nowadays in free agency, you're going to have guys coming in and shuttling in across the board, right? You can't do that, right? You got to have a competitive environment and allow these new guys to come in and maybe supplant the stars. Maybe you've got an exciting rookie or other exciting veterans, and a new addition comes in and beats him out outright. And that's the case. He becomes a starter. You got to have that competitive environment in today's National Football League. Big difference between the 2020s versus the 1990s. Again, I'm not trying to be too critical. I'm not critical in general of Jimmy Johnson, but I think it's important to understand, because a lot of people, especially Cowboys fans, are like, oh, I wish things would be just like it was when it was 1991 or 1977 or whatever, right? And like, listen, it's a different era, right? What Johnson did worked. But the problem is, and it wasn't necessarily his fault, but when free agency happened later in the 1990s, they didn't have the depth. because Jimmy Johnson never emphasized the competitive element needed to build out the depth, right? He emphasized on building the competitive element, the hyper-competitive element, to be really good at the top of the roster, to be really good for your starters and your stars, right? Never developed in terms of the second, third tier guys. Schottenheimer has done a great job with that up to this point. It's a difference in the National Football League in 2025, 1995, and I think it's a big part of what the Cowboys could use as, just building momentum and becoming a better team going forward. All right. Wonder how many people I'm going to get in the comments. I'm going to be like, you said something bad about Jimmy Johnson. Not saying anything bad about Jimmy Johnson. I'm just saying it's a different era. I think Jimmy Johnson, if he knew that free agency was coming, he probably would have changed up his strategy as well. I think that's probably fair. I honestly think, before we get into this latest report here, the timing of free agency, I took away probably 2 championships from Dallas, if we're being totally honest, right? I know people said, well, they signed Deion Sanders. Yeah, but so much of their talent, in terms of modern free agency, obviously there was some free agency back in the day, but it just sort of eviscerated all levels of their talent, right? In terms of key starters and key role players just started getting ripped away from the team just en masse. And they try to keep the stars together and all of that, but the team's depth and base just completely evaporated. And I think if Jimmy Johnson knew that was coming and knew the effect it could potentially have, because no one knew what free agency would do at the time, right? People were like, what's going to happen? How's this going to work? And it turns out how it worked then, it kind of works this way now in some ways. Losing teams, lower tier teams, they look at championship teams and they try and sign as many of their players as they can from those championship teams, even if they overpay a little bit. And the Cowboys just got eviscerated, right? Just totally just ripped bare by free agency in terms of everything except their stars. And Jimmy Johnson didn't see it coming. Barry Switzer obviously didn't see it coming. No one on the Cowboys saw it coming. And then, of course, we saw what happened in the second half of the 1990s when the depth and the overall talent base just dropped dramatically. People ask me sometimes, like, what happened with the Cowboys? Was it just injuries? Was it just coaching? I said, no, it's free agency, right? And it was an era where teams didn't know how to handle it. So now in today's NFL, you got to have the competitive environment and you got to have the incentive structures to motivate depth, right? And I think that's a great job by Schottenheimer, having that mindset and framework, setting that just sort of standard now so that the Cowboys could have that as part of their culture, not just for this season, but for many years to come. All right, this next report is courtesy of Joseph Hoyt. Cowboys, he's responding to he's got 2 tweets here. Let me go to the first one. He says, Cowboys co-owner Stephen Jones said on 105 through the Fan that running back Miles Sanders is out for the season. Like I already mentioned, Cowboys also have running back Jaden Blue and fullback Hunter Lipke behind Javonte Williams. Malik Davis is also on the practice squad. And then Hoyt also responded, Cowboys also have rookie running back Phil Maffa on injured reserve. He's been working on the side field for the Cowboys as he gears up for a potential return. He impressed in preseason. It'll be very interesting. There's a lot of people during the preseason that said, listen, I want Jaden Blue and I want Phil Maffa leading this backfield. And guys, you may have that opportunity sooner rather than later. Now, look, Maffa's still hurt. He hasn't been cleared to practice. I think at the time, putting Maffa on injured reserve he was beat up a little bit, of course. He did have the injury issues. But I think also it was stashing him a little bit. They want to make sure they didn't have to put him on practice squad and have him go through waivers or anything like that. So I do think the Cowboys really like Phil Maffa. If he can get healthy, I think he's got a great chance to play this season. We'll have to see, of course, if he can get healthy and what he can perform like. But yeah, I think the Cowboys, very interesting, as much as the Miles Sanders injury really stinks, and feel for him completely. The young depth in the running back room and just sort of the energy and buzz that emerged during training camp, there's a lot to be excited about. So obviously Jaden Blue is the man of the moment to take advantage of that. But Phil Maffa is lurking in the background right now. Definitely a name to keep an eye on going forward. All right, this is from Nick Harris, great reporter over at the Fort Worth Star-Telegram. If you're looking for a follow on X, and if you're not following me, which you should be because I'm now on X, I'll again keep advertising that. Cowboys, Nick Harris is one of the guys to follow. You can see his handle right there on the screen. But he reports Cowboys center Cooper Beebe was working with the rehab group today. First time the media has seen him out on the field since he broke a bone in his foot and sprained his ankle in week 2 versus the Giants. Beebe is eligible to open up his practice window next Wednesday. So I didn't know he broke a bone in his foot. I had heard about, of course, it was a severe ankle sprain. But the fact that there's a broken bone in the foot kind of makes me more understanding of why his injury timeline has been longer than, say, CeeDee Lamb's or Tyler Booker's up to this point. So, okay, you had a broken bone. That makes more sense. Him getting, the band work, getting back on the field. I mean, it's clear at this point that, he can operate and do things as an athlete. Now he's going through the actual rehab. Is he going to be available next week for Washington? That feels like a stretch, but it feels like he's coming sooner rather than later. So again, we've got some, obviously some short-term injury hiccups, a lot of bumps and bruises on the roster still. But guys, the cavalry is freaking coming right now. I mean, you got Lamb, Lamb and Booker, who both seem to be trending towards next week Washington. If not Washington, it'll certainly be the week following at the latest. I mean, they've been doing band work for weeks now. I think the Cowboys have targeted the Washington game for both of those players. I think that was sort of their plan all along, and the trend continues to be that way. We'll see how things go, of course, this week. Well, I guess this week's practice is over, so it'll be next week for those two guys. Beebe is trending along soon to return, right? You look at across the board, you've got Revel getting back into the fold, Overshown, like we let off the show with. I mean, the cavalry is coming in terms of having some starters and depth guys back into the fold. Butler as a defensive back, also adding some depth. Phil Maffa, like I just mentioned a second ago. I mean, it's one of those things that's very interesting. This Cowboys team is as beat up as they've been. If they can build some momentum, and as they've done a good job slowly figuring things out, this team really into November, and I kind of talked about this all August and really part of September. I said September was going to be rough, and they were going to get better as we got deeper into October, right? That was sort of how I described the season. And then this rash of injuries happened. So I think they've played better than I expected in some ways, and in some ways worse than I expected if you look at offense versus defense in September. But they've battled through the injuries, and if they can get healthier, I think they've got a chance to really build some momentum in November, December to finish out the second half of the season. I'm excited to see how it all shakes out, right? It's been impressive just to the fact that they, up to this point, have weathered the storm and gotten some good play out of guys, but getting, Beebe back, getting, CeeDee Lamb, Booker, right, Overshown, Revel, getting all of these guys, Maffa, start getting all these guys back into the fold. I think that's going to be an exciting thing to watch. All right, last report here was a post by Kevin Clark. Just circling back to the Overshown story at the top of the show. Clark works for ESPN, I think, or works for Peyton Manning's Omaha company with ESPN. I don't know exactly how it works. But he's just a football commentator for anyone who hasn't heard of him. Was a longtime writer at The Ringer and other sites. But he had Bijan Robinson guesting or joining him on his podcast or something to that effect. But anyway, he posted the biggest badass Bijan Robinson has ever played with. His college teammate at Texas, DeMarvion Overshown. Their physical practice were the stuff of legend. He was killing with the Cowboys before the injury. He's definitely the guy I would say made me a much better player. Yeah, again, it speaks to Overshown's talent, his physicality. I mean, we all know it, of course, but I don't think people outside of Dallas really understand how good Overshown was last year and how good he was becoming. And that's why I'm so excited to see him play again. Now, it's going to take some time to get sped up, of course, but the earlier he can get back to practice, the earlier he can get back on the field, and the earlier he can get sped up, and hopefully the earlier he can be unleashed again. Because this was a guy, and Bijan Robinson knows it better than anybody. I say, if you're looking for the best source of who good players are, go to other players. They'll tell you. I know a lot of people aren't necessarily a big fan of when the NFL does the top 100 players in the National Football League, and the rankings can be kind of funny every once in a while because just the way the numbers and the voting shakes out. But generally, if you throw away the rankings and just look at the list of guys, it's the right list of the top 100 players in the National Football League. The players know who the good players are, right? There may be some insights that a coach or a team has on a specific under-the-radar player, but in terms of the top, the players know. Right, Bijan Robinson, obviously a great running back, right? He knows who the better players are. He knows who the better linebackers are, who the better defenders are. He talked about it in their time in Texas with Overshown. He knows it based on what Overshown was doing with Dallas last year. People forget Overshown had a great game against Bijan Robinson and the Atlanta Falcons. He had, I think, 3 or 4 tackles for loss and something like that. Monster game. I mean, what a playmaker. A lot of great games. I'm excited to see Overshown back, guys. I know I'm very biased to that. I'm sure a lot of you guys are as well. But boy, such a great player. I know there's going to be a spin-up time. I know it's going to take a long time at practice, and they're going to have to ease him into the games and things like that. But once he gets eased into it and feels comfortable, which the fact that he's trending earlier rather than later could be Thanksgiving time frame, would be such a huge boost for the Cowboys. The second, third of the season at that point, which obviously would be great for Dallas. All right, let's get into the comment section here. All right, starting with member comments, as we always do. That's my promise to all of our members. I will address every single member comment, and I will address the member comments first. As time permits, I'll get to the non-member comments, but obviously don't want to spend 3 hours on the show right here just talking about comments. So we will always make sure we go with the member comments first and get them all. So if you want to make sure your voice always gets heard, become a member. It's a way to support the show. I greatly appreciate it. Without further ado, let's open up the first one here. This is from Chris Oldham. He said 2 under-the-radar players from the Jets game, left guard Adinji and nickel cornerback Stewart. Never heard their names on the broadcast, which is excellent. That's a fair point. Job well done. Reedy has been the consistent starting nickel the entire season, and nobody says a word about him. Yeah, he's been fine. He's been good. But I will say this. One of the things that happens when you play a lot more zone coverage is it can cover up corners and players like Stewart, right? Inside nickel guys. Nickel's a tough position when you play man coverage, right? That's why Jordan Lewis was so good with the Dallas Cowboys, and that's why the Jacksonville Jaguars paid him a ton of money, because you're an inside corner, you got a lot of grass to cover, it's a tough situation. If you play a lot of man, it's a tough deal. But if you play a lot of zone, it's a little easier, right? Not saying it's easy, and Stewart has certainly done extremely well in terms of his expectations and what people expected from him. But when you play zone, right, a lot of those inside nickel, you can kind of, you hand off a lot of these inside receivers to your safeties or outside corners, right? You can, if depending on the coverage, right, you're playing more off coverage, so you don't have a chance to give up the big plays. So Stewart's been playing well, but based on how Eberflus liked to play earlier in the season, it kind of helped cover him up a little bit. And I think the fact that the Cowboys are at least going to play more man and have played a little more man, it'll be interesting to see what he does going forward. But he has been very, very good. It's been a good addition for Dallas. I think surprising me and a lot of other people how well he's played. The second point here is context for the season stats expose on X, talking about Trayvon Diggs and his kind of funky season where he's in 5 games, he's given up, I think, 10 targets, 8 catches for like $150 yards and 3 touchdowns, no interceptions. He's given up a perfect passer rating, but like almost no yards per game. So it's been kind of a wild, extreme year for Diggs. This is what Chris has to say about that. Game 1, played on a pitch count, so discount that game. Analyze the numbers based on 4 games. Average targets, 2.5. Average completion, 2. Average yards, 40. Phenomenal numbers for a number 1 cornerback who missed all OTAs, mini camps, training camp, and preseason games while rehabbing from a season-ending knee injury. Plus, factor out the ugly bust, and Diggs is far exceeding my expectations so far, given the difficulties of returning from a knee injury. Adrian Peterson was not normal, a freak of nature. Yeah, it's one of those things with Diggs. It's so weird. He's had some really disaster plays. But other than that, he's been really good. He's actually tackled fine as well. I mean, he hasn't been perfect tackling in the run game. He's actually not been so good there. But in terms of coverage tackling, he's been outstanding. So it's one of those weird things where it's if the ugly busts have just been so ugly that it's just hard not to forget about him. But on a snap-by-snap basis, he's actually been pretty good. It's one of those numbers, and that data point that I brought up yesterday is so interesting when it comes to Diggs, because it's very rare you see a player like that where it's the extremes are so prevalent, where he's targeted 10 times through 5 games, right? He did play against the Eagles, pitch count, that's true, he did play, but targets 10 times through 5 games, that's like all-pro corner, right? It's like Darrelle Revis kind of stuff. But he also has surrendered a perfect passer rating on those targets, which is obviously not Darrelle Revis kind of stuff. So, I had a post, I think, on X where I said Diggs this season has basically been like 80% Darrelle Revis and 20% Anthony Brown. And it's just been one of those weird seasons. It'll be interesting to see what happens going forward. If he can start getting takeaways again, he'll turn this around. He'll start getting some recognition for being, back to his old self, playing at a very, very high level. All right, this next comment is from Plague Doctor. He wrote, I want to see Thomas take Steele's spot, talking about Nathan Thomas. Guyton is going to be at least average. I want to see Wilson replaced by Wanye Thomas. I think Julius Wood coming back could push Hooker at some point also, though Hooker is at least average or above. Wilson is sub-average by the eye test and metrics. One thing I like about this new coaching staff is that I see them make common sense moves, like starting James and Leofau over Clark, when both have clearly played better than Clark. It definitely hasn't felt like we've always done that. Yeah, McCarthy always kind of leaned toward veteran guys, right? That was always his theme. I want to play the veterans, right? Even if there's some exciting rookies, I want to play the veterans. I'm going to give them more opportunities. CeeDee Lamb coming out of school was like this, right? He was obviously and always has been a great player, but he was the number 3 wide receiver. Obviously, Cooper was really good, of course. But listen, I'm going to be honest. CeeDee Lamb is better than Amari Cooper. Now, I'm not saying he was better than his rookie season, but you could see the flashes. Same thing, like CeeDee Lamb was clearly better than Michael Gallup, for example, and Cedric Wilson at the time, right? But they gave those guys a lot of opportunities. And it was clear Mike McCarthy was like, well, he's a rookie. You kind of want to ease him into it a little bit. But it's like, no, man, he's a superstar. Let him grow and develop earlier. And I think that's one of the downsides of playing veterans first and not allowing your rookies to develop and give them opportunities if they're more talented, like CeeDee Lamb was, like Shamar James certainly is, like Maris Leofau certainly is when it comes to a guy like Damone Clark, is that when it's time for those young players to actually step up, when it's their time to shine, they don't have as much experience as you'd hope for. right? CeeDee Lamb in 2022 finished the season strong. Of course, he's a great player. But the reality was, if he had gotten more opportunities in 2020, I think he would have been 2023 CeeDee Lamb in 2022. And then suddenly you look at that playoff game against San Francisco, maybe it goes a little differently. I'm not saying it does, and CeeDee Lamb played great, so I'm not saying Lamb was the reason they lost. But I'm just saying you just never know what happens. So if you've got young, talented players, let them play, let them grow, let them develop. Work through the learning curve, work through the bumps along the way, right? There's nothing wrong with growing and developing and building a team and going through some growing pains working with a young player. Mike McCarthy hated doing that, right? And I think it really hurt the development of some of their players, right? If you look at Trayvon Diggs, he's a great example of that. Like he had to play just based on injuries and their defensive talent at the time, but he went through some lumps his rookie season. But by the second half, he figured out he could generate takeaways, and then he went into 2021 and had that monster season, right? But a lot of times, Mike McCarthy, he just didn't like playing the young guys, and it really hurt the development of some of those players. You look at Schottenheimer and his staff across the board, different approach, and I'm a fan of it. All right, let's get into this next batch of comments. This next one is from Surge Cells ATX. Hopefully I'm getting that right. Or Surge Cell Sadix. Whatever your handle is, I apologize. He wrote, didn't know you were originally from San Antonio. Brought a smile to my face as someone from the area also. I really enjoy that you interact with your followers in the comments. Thank you. The information and perspective is something I feel a lot of other channels miss. I think these next few games will determine the rest of the season. We are allowing some of our youth and backups to gain experience. Exactly what I just mentioned. I think it's become very clear. If we win, I hope we can get a pass rusher via trade. I also like the idea of maybe Woolen for a day 3 and maybe a linebacker because I just don't know about that group, even with Overshown coming back. Too much uncertainty at that position. Yeah, I think the problem there is uncertainty, I agree, but it's almost a good thing because you get to evaluate James, evaluate Leofau, right? And then Overshown comes back, right? So part of the thing is having young players, there's going to be some uncertainty. That's what happens. Veteran players, you get stability. You know how good and bad they are, right? You know how good and bad Sanborn is. You know how good and bad Murray is, for example. But you don't know how good and bad Shamar James could be. You don't know how good or bad Maris Leofau could be. So give them the opportunities. They could become stars, right? There's going to be some bumps along the way, but play the young guys and let it play out. I know the temptation is like, man, offense is doing great. They've been playing good ball. Maybe we just need to add a veteran or two on defense just to stabilize things. And I understand that everyone's coming from a good spot because you look how well Prescott's playing, but that's not how you build a team, guys. That's not how you set up long-term success. That's not how you develop players and get them prepared. Listen, if you're all in, if you're like the Packers who have traded away your future, right, the way they did to get Micah Parsons, that makes sense, right? But not the Cowboys. Like we all know this. Right? This is a team that's built for 2027, right? They want to win now. They think they can do some good things this year, but their overall roster construction with the cap space and the 2 extra first-round picks over the next 2 seasons, they're built to win for 2027, to be a serious contender in 2027. That's how the roster is constructed, or at least will be constructed, right? That'll be year 3 of Schottenheimer's culture, right? What they're doing now, imagine what they could be doing in 2-3 years. Right? Think about that for a second. So I think it's important to understand that context. Now, if the opportunity is there for a great trade and get great value, by all means, jump on it, right? Whether it's in October, November, or March, right? If you have a chance to pull off a high value move, you do it. But you don't go acting like a desperate all-in team right now. And I don't think the Cowboys will. I just think it's important to throw that out there because the Cowboys, they've said this screaming from the rooftops about 5,000 times. And I make sure to highlight it whenever a story comes up, kind of reinforcing this narrative. They're building for the future. That's been their plan all along. And so I don't think they're going to do anything, at least anything massive, that'll deter from that plan. David Lawrence 8051 comments, I think Romo was a good face of the franchise. He took the blame every time that the Cowboys lost, even when it was obviously it wasn't his fault. I've seen Dak get a little too spicy with the media, even with the Jones. I think it's just maybe a personal preference thing, but I always think Dak Prescott is like the perfect PR quarterback. He's been outstanding. He's been awesome. Romo wasn't bad. Romo was perfectly fine, but I just think Prescott was better in that role. Just my personal opinion. I mean, obviously, it's biases and just what you like one way or the other in terms of how you want your quarterback to handle yourself. Obviously, Romo took a lot of blame. That was undeserving. I agree 100% there. But it's just what you look for your quarterback and how you want him to present from the media. I personally just think, I like what Prescott's doing more than Romo. So that's just my opinion there. Dino Lachey 93-97 commented, elite pass rushers are not the ingredient to winning the Super Bowl, but a multitude of playmakers on all three facets, plus coaching wins. Ask Myles Garrett, TJ Watt, Micah, Max Crosby, etc. DeLone pass rushing war daddy is not the way to go. Correct. 100% correct. And by the way, TJ Watt's not even alone either. They got some good pass rushers around him, right? Myles Garrett, that's a good defense, right, in terms of what they have in Cleveland. Right, even if you look at the Raiders, right, they've got Malcolm Kuntz. They've done a lot of investment on defense. At least they tried with guys like Christian Wilkins. It didn't work out in Las Vegas. Wilkins appears to have serious injury limitations. But the reality is, you need to be talented and deep, like you mentioned, in all three layers. You're 100% correct. This is the perfect comment, right? You cannot win on just sheer raw superstar talent alone. You can get close, and if things break right with perfect coaching, maybe you can get close. But the Eagles proved it. The Chiefs have proved it. You know, we talked about this a couple of years ago on our main channel. One of the things that's so remarkable about the Kansas City Chiefs during their dynastic run when they went to 3 straight Super Bowls, we'll see what happens this year if they can go to a 4th. Not looking so good so far, but obviously the season is young, is that they had a roster with no real weakness. When you looked at where they ranked and everything, they were like, the worst parts of their roster were like 15th, 14th, 16th, 15th. So they just never really had a weakness. They were so deep and they had, you know, enough talent everywhere, and they weren't really bad anywhere that no team could really attack them. No team had an area that they could really exploit. And that meant that the areas that were strong for the Chiefs, like Andy Reid's play calling and, of course, Patrick Mahomes and guys like Chris Jones up front, they could just win on those guys. So it just sort of looked like, it's an okay team with Patrick Mahomes, but that was by design. The Patriots were very similar, right? They were the dynastic Patriots. They were very, multifaceted. They were very deep. They could do a bunch of different things. They had no clear weaknesses most seasons, right? And I think that's the strategy for sustained success, right? If you have a deep roster across the board with talent at all three levels, but with no clear weakness, you can win a championship. That's the way to success. Philadelphia proved that last year, by the way. Having just that 1 or 2 superstar, you can pull it off. Magic can happen. But boy, it's just a lot tougher, certainly in the long term. You can have a magical one-time run, right? Obviously, like, for example, the Giants in '07 are a great example of that. But the reality is sustained success, it happens when you have a deep, talented roster at multiple levels. Great comment here. All right, this next comment is from Travis Graham, 7636, talking about 105.3 The Fan. I get a lot of comments about that radio channel. I'm not from Dallas, so I'm always curious about that. He posted, the 105.3 The Fan is good at times, but the times it's good is just as bad. Very opinionated and exaggerated, in my opinion. Don't get me wrong, though. You can't beat the station with the people that get on there. Like today, that had Shadi on there, and they had weekly interviews with Jerry, too, which is cool. I get this a lot from a lot of people when it comes to local sports talk media. One of the reasons I like highlighting reporters, whether it's Patrick Walker, Nick Harris, right? There's a bunch of them. I try not, John Machota, right? Todd Archer. I go down the list. There's like 20 guys, and obviously anyone who watches the show regularly knows a lot of the guys that I reference and I try and cite. I think the beat reporters do great, but I think the guys on the radio, sports talk radio, I don't know what it is, but boy, it's just like not a lot of happy people. I mean, the team can be great, and it's not a lot of happy people. It seems to be the case no matter where you are and what team you're following. So interesting model there. All right, this next comment is from Anchors Away 9893. Length of the morning videos is fine. Okay, very good. We're 43 minutes in at this point, so that's good to good to get the feedback there. I appreciate that. Cowboys have had mediocre to poor coaching for a long time. Shawnee has definitely impressed me so far. We are not getting out-coached. That is true. For the first time in a long time, the Cowboys are actually winning the coaching battle most games as opposed to losing the coaching battle most games. In prior years, they won in spite of their coaching. I felt this year they're winning. When they are winning or playing good football, at least, they're doing it because of their coaching. I feel optimistic about the Cowboys for the first time in a long time. Even those 12-5 years, I knew we were not going anywhere. Yeah, it did feel like those 12-5 years, it felt like there was chances to win. But again, when you don't have the great coaching and you don't have a deep roster, you're just sort of like, man, if Dak plays great, or if Zeke plays great, or whatever, or if Micah goes off, then we'll win. But boy, if we don't, if the game gets away from us, we're in trouble. Like in 2021, San Francisco, they came back, of course, in the wild card round, and in 2023, where they obviously didn't. Fourth point here, this is a wild card team set from the onset of the season. We'll see, right? I mean, long football season, a lot of football left to be played. Next comment, Ed Toth 4676 commented, perfectly said about the Cowboy bias. Leroy Jordan not in the Hall of Fame is horrendous, and there are others. Yeah, there's so many, right? For whatever reason, it's the media space and the voters for the Hall of Fame have hated the Cowboys, always have, right? like how long it took Bullet Bob Hayes to get in the Hall of Fame is an absolute travesty. Rayfield Wright, Chuck Howley. I mean, it's been an embarrassment in the NFL how long it takes for some of these guys. The Fulchman commented, you misstated the gap between teams comparison, talking about the graphic yesterday. The gap between Dallas and Kansas City is 2.4%. The gap between Kansas City and New England is only 1.45%. The more appropriate comparison is to say that the gap between Dallas and number 2 Kansas City is roughly the same as the gap between Kansas City and number 13 Charlotte, which is 2.45%. Thank you for the fact check. I really appreciate it. Listen, I make mistakes, obviously. So if I make a mistake or I get something wrong, please fact check me. Please correct me. I think the most important thing I try to do on this channel is to be correct when it comes to the facts and the data. Nobody's perfect. I'm certainly not. So if I get something wrong, I want you to fact check me. I want you to correct me in the comment section below. Please do. I highly encourage it. I want to get that feedback. That's important to me for the show. So thank you, the Fulchman, for doing that. I greatly appreciate it. And finally, Neo7566 comments, great points, but the offense is more unpredictable. Under Mike McCarthy, things were predictable. This offense is just scratching the surface of what it can do. Shore up the defense, but it all comes to Dak continuing to play at a high level. We'll see, but we have an opportunity to be successful and get into the tournament, and then who knows? Yeah, I mean, it's a little too early, in my opinion, to start talking about playoffs and things like that, right? We're getting into week 6, guys. For me, playoff talk usually happens post-Thanksgiving. Okay, let's talk about playoffs. That's sort of my personal rule, and I think Bill Parcells kind of had that model as well. So let's get to Thanksgiving first and then go from there. Julian Edelman, the former Patriots wide receiver, had a saying recently where he said, listen, the first 8 weeks of the season, I mean, you're just trying to figure out what you are and just trying to survive, and that's where you make your move. So I kind of take that kind of mindset as well. You get to Thanksgiving, and now it's all about playoff seeding after that, kind of seeing if you're a good team or not at that point. But listen, they are certainly much more unpredictable. They're sequencing plays. Coaching is better, I think, across the board. So far, at least offensively, they're doing a lot of good things. There is some signs of defensive improvement, but got to stack good performances. But overall, I think we're all in agreement here that the Schottenheimer coaching staff has done a really good job in terms of how they've developed the offense and the trajectory this team is on and the culture and just all those things Schottenheimer was brought in to do, at least at this point, he's doing or has done. All right, guys, that's all the comments. A lot of comments today. All right, we're in big college football Saturday. A lot of big games today, of course. And then we got week 6 tomorrow. We're going to have some news tomorrow morning with our sort of morning show like we do every single day, whether it's a game day or not. Like, that's just how we roll, how I like to roll, be consistent, do it every day. So going to have more news for you tomorrow as we get ready for the Cowboys week 6 matchup. But until then, I'm Nick, and this is Saturday Morning Inspection.